When we speak about black magic or occult practices or dark energies, we humans often tend to categorize them under the title of evil or bad, which necessarily doesn't have to be so. One must understand that this entire metaverse is largely in darkness. Light just happens to be a very small phenomena. This is one such spooky incident which I experienced in Jamshedpur way back in the early 90s during my college days. Every year during Christmas, I used to be spending my Christmas vacations with a friend of mine in Jamshedpur. Upcountry folks had a blissful and a blessed way of celebrating the season, with house parties, annual dances, and a lot of Christmas carols. They brought in a magic of inclusiveness amongst the entire community. With the celebration aside, our favorite pastime was to drive down to Kalaikonda Air Force Base and see the fighter jets doing their evening sorties. And our favorite hangout was camping in the night in the Dalma forest. Being frequent on this trail, we often interacted with some wonderful tribal people who lived at the foothills of Dalma Hills. In one of our frequent visits in the previous years, we had encountered a witch doctor who said to have cured many illnesses and diseases. On speaking with her in some broken Hindi, we realized that she practiced some kind of occult or tantra, as you may call it. It was December of 1993, and here I was at the Tatanagar railway station waiting for my best friend Chris to pick me up. From the time I got onto Chris's bike till the time I reached his place, I was all excited talking about all the events and the adventures that I had on my mind. Unlike Chris, who was so full of life, he was down in spirit. He didn't respond much. On speaking to his parents, I got to know that his girlfriend Maria was suffering some kind of strange ailment for the last few days. We visited Maria that evening and I saw an unusual swelling on her right leg. She couldn't speak much. She frequently coughed. She has been on heavy medication and painkillers for the last few days, which made her extremely weak. The following day, her leg was turning green. We initially thought it was a gangrene or something like that, but there was no cuts or bruises on her leg. The doctors were yet to detect what was wrong. The third day was a nightmare. We got a call at 3 a.m. in the morning. We rushed to Maria's place and what we saw was extremely shocking. She was sitting up straight on her bed with her hair in front of her face and grinning in a male voice. Her leg had turned terrible. Her mom said she was sitting up all night. It was only when the grinning started that she got nervous and called us. My blood ran cold. We phoned the ambulance immediately and rushed her to the hospital. It was a back-breaking experience for us carrying Maria into the ambulance. She had this unusual weight of about 200 or 250 kgs when her actual weight was 50. 8 of us, including the ambulance attendants, carried her into the ambulance. This unusual weight kept us surprised for a very long time. As a matter of fact, it still haunts us even till this day. Hospital was a horror scene. I have never seen so many doctors attending to one patient in the ICU at the same time. Blood tests were being done. Procedures were being carried out the entire day and night. I still remember sleeping under a tree in the hospital compound that night. Next, we were woken up with the alarming news that Maria was deteriorating and she has to be immediately moved to Kolkata. Chris looked at me and pulled me towards a corner. He said, "Let's take her to the tribal village before we can take her to Calcutta." It was a mammoth task convincing her parents that night. We drove to Dalma Hills in a Willys Jeep early parts of the morning and Maria was unconscious the entire way. As soon as we reached the village, the entire tribe surrounded the Jeep and they had bows, arrows and spears with them. It looked like an Indiana Jones arena. Trust me. Surprisingly, we saw the witch doctor standing in the crowd. She immediately ordered few villagers to carry Maria into her hut. It was like she knew, she manifested that we were coming. The villagers carried Maria in a makeshift stretcher into her hut. Her hut comprised of a cot laying in one corner, few utensils thrown around, a pile of sindoor, turmeric powder, garlands, beads, various kinds of stones, and her deity at the center of the room. The villagers put her on a cot and left silently. We stood there ice cold. She lit up the firewood, throwing various kinds of powders into it. And within seconds, her room turned into a smoke chamber with almost zero visibility. Maria started groaning in a man's voice again. As the smoke got thicker and thicker, Maria's groaning became louder and louder. Almost choked, Chris and myself rushed outside, closing the door behind us. Maria's parents stood outside helpless and hopeless in tears. By afternoon, Maria's groaning was eventually subsiding. We were all expressionless. We were on a different high that day. The witch doctor called us inside and ordered us to get a live chicken and a mud chatty filled with Indian sweets soaked in sugar syrup. There was no sweetmeat shop in the 10 kilometers radius of the village. I drove to town to get the sweets while Chris managed to arrange a chicken somehow from the village. We rushed back as fast as we could. The witch doctor slit the chicken's throat and held it by her hand till such time the chicken was completely dead, placed it on a metal plate and put it underneath the cot where Maria laid down. The mud chatty with sweets, she placed it between her legs. After that, the sight we saw was no less than a horror movie. The witch doctor's eyes was bloodshot. She lit up the smoke again. I felt like I was surrounded by a certain kind of energy which was beyond the physical. The firewood started smoking up. She started shoving Maria's nostrils with the chili powder and with 2 broken pieces of bamboo. Maria's groaning became louder. The blood on the plate and the sugar syrup completely disappeared. The rasgullas and the chicken became absolutely bloodless white. In aggression, she asked Maria, "Who are you?" several times in a Adivashi language. Suddenly, Maria's eyes opened wide and she replied in a man's voice, "Alan, Alan, Alan." We were too frightened to see Maria in that state. We rushed out. We were in shivers. It was evening by this time when the villagers walked into the hut again and carried Maria and put her in the portico outside her hut. We could see the swelling on the leg had completely disappeared, but she was still unconscious. The tribal started putting lamps and candles all around Maria's body. Maria's mom almost lost her balance seeing her daughter in this state. We were all happy from inside that the swelling had subsided, but we were all expressionless. The witch doctor came out and put some liquid into Maria's mouth as she started getting her consciousness back. Chris somehow carried Maria into the jeep. Maria's parents walked up to the witch doctor and touched her feet and thanked her endlessly, even offered a lot of money to her, but she refused. All she said was, "I have to return these energies back to the person who did this to Maria, to nullify the power." We didn't understand much. We kept silent. You don't ask many questions to these kind of people. She also mentioned that this was a very powerful energy that could have damaged Maria. It could have resulted into a death or a disability. We folded our hands and left. Finally, that year, we all went for the annual dance at the Railway Institute. Both Chris and Maria are happily married today with a son and lives in Canada. We haven't spoken to Maria about this incident ever since. We don't even discuss this in our weekly Google Meets these days. Much later, we got to know about this guy Alan, who studied with Maria in our college. We didn't speak to him about this incident either. All we came to know that he had lost one of his legs while crossing the railway tracks. Interesting, huh? That day I learned something, that occult practices isn't that bad as we often term it as. As we bow down to light, we should learn to bow down to darkness also to keep the balance. And when we create this balance, we'll have no judgment. We'll just see things or people just the way they are. For those of you who are explorer by nature, must visit this Dalma forest. Do some camping in the night and especially visit the tribal village. Dalma Wildlife Sanctuary and this tribal village is about an hour and a half from the Jamshedpur railway station. You can hire a car or even local transports are available to reach there. So if you like this story, please like, share and subscribe. See you with another story very soon.